You're not welcome here. Grandpa didn't want you. Those were the first words Derek said to me, standing in the doorway of St. Andrew's like a bouncer at a nightclub instead of my stepbrother at our grandfather's funeral. I had driven 6 hours through the night and missed my daughter's dance recital, the one she'd been practicing for since September, because family comes first, because that's what Grandpa always taught me. And now the man who used to sneak me extra dessert when I was 7 was now preventing me from saying goodbye. If you've ever been shut out by the people who were supposed to love you, stay with me. This is Family Betrayal Verdict, and it's about the day I got locked out of my own grandfather's funeral. Derek, move, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. He did not move. Instead, he crossed his arms, and I noticed his knuckles were white against his black suit jacket. Security has instructions, he said. You're not on the list. There is no list. This isn't a nightclub. This is Grandpa's funeral. Behind him, through the open church doors, I could see the flowers. White lilies, his favorite. I could see the edge of the casket, dark wood polished so it caught the light from the stained glass. My chest tightened so hard I had to remind myself to breathe. I thought about the last time I talked to him. 2 weeks ago, a Sunday, like always. You still coming for Thanksgiving, kiddo? He'd asked, and I could hear him settling into his recliner, the same creak it always made. Wouldn't miss it, I told him. Good. I want to talk to you about some things. Important things. I hadn't thought much of it then. Now the words sat in my stomach like stones. Emma. My Aunt Carol appeared beside Derek, smoothing her dress, her face arranged into an expression of practiced sympathy. Sweetheart, we just think it's better this way. For everyone. Better for who, Carol? I flew out here. I missed my own daughter's recital. We just don't want a scene. Not today. A scene. As if grief made a person dangerous. As if showing up to bury the man who raised half of me was somehow an act of aggression. He called me every single Sunday for 15 years, I said, and my voice cracked on the last word. Every Sunday, Carol. Did you know that? She didn't answer. She just glanced at Derek, and something quick and guilty passed between them before disappearing. You're not on the list, Derek said again, like a line he had memorized. Security has instructions. What security? This is a church, not a courthouse. The funeral home's security. They're right inside if you want to make this difficult. I looked past him one more time. I saw my cousin Rachel in the third pew, twisting a tissue in her hands, refusing to meet my eyes. I saw people I'd known my whole life, people who'd sat at my grandfather's table, eaten his cooking, laughed at his terrible jokes, all of them pretending not to notice the woman standing outside the doors like a stranger. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against my thighs to make them stop. He wouldn't do this, I said, mostly to myself. He wouldn't want this. You didn't know him as well as you think you did, Derek said, and there was something underneath his voice now, something sharper than grief. Something that sounded almost like fear. I remembered that detail, even though I did not yet understand why it mattered. Fine, I said. Fine. I'll wait outside. Carol's shoulders relaxed, like she'd been bracing for a fight and was relieved it wasn't coming. She reached out and touched my arm, the way you'd pat a dog that had finally stopped barking. This is the right choice, sweetheart. We'll talk after. I promise. I pulled my arm back before she could finish the gesture. I walked to my car in the parking lot, my heels sinking slightly into the gravel, my vision blurring at the edges. I sat down behind the wheel and gripped it with both hands, just to have something solid to hold on to. Through the windshield, I could see the church doors close. I could hear, faintly, the organ starting up inside, the first notes of a hymn I recognized because Grandpa used to hum it while he mowed the lawn. I thought about the fishing trips. I was 9 years old, and he'd wake me before sunrise, hand me a thermos of hot chocolate, and tell me the fish only bit for people who knew how to be patient. I wasn't his blood. My mother married his son when I was 6. But he never once made me feel like a step-granddaughter. I was simply his girl. That was what he always called me. And now his girl was locked outside his funeral, listening to a hymn through a closed door, while people who barely called him once a month sat inside pretending to grieve. My phone buzzed in my purse. I almost didn't look at it. But something made me check. It was a voicemail notification. Missed call, 3 weeks ago, from a number I didn't recognize but a voice I would know anywhere. I hadn't listened to it yet. I'd been busy, distracted, telling myself I'd call him back and hear whatever it was in person. I never got the chance. My thumb hovered over the play button. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Whatever was on that voicemail, I had a feeling it was going to change everything. I didn't press play. Not yet. My hands were shaking too hard, and some part of me needed to save it, like it was the last piece of him I had left and I wasn't ready to spend it. Instead I called Rachel. She picked up on the 4th ring, her voice low, like she was cupping the phone and hiding in a hallway somewhere. Emma. I can't really talk right now. Rachel, they locked me out. Derek and Carol, they wouldn't let me in. A pause. Too long. The kind of pause that told me she already knew. I heard, she said finally. You heard? Rachel, you're my cousin. You grew up with me at that house. Say something. It's complicated, okay? Derek said there were reasons. Family reasons. What reasons? What could possibly be a reason to keep me from saying goodbye to my own grandfather? I don't know the details. I just know Derek said it was for the best, and Aunt Carol agreed, and I didn't want to make things worse by pushing back. There it was. The same words, recycled. It was for the best. Nobody wanted a scene. Nobody wanted to make things worse. As if my grief was the problem instead of the door they'd shut in my face. You always acted like you were closer to him than the rest of us, Derek had said once, years ago, at a Christmas dinner, half joking, half not. I hadn't understood then what that resentment might eventually cost me. I just don't want any drama today, Emma, Rachel said now, echoing him almost word for word. Please. Can we just get through the service and talk after? There won't be an after if I'm not allowed in. She didn't answer that. I heard voices behind her, muffled, and then she said she had to go, and the line went dead. I sat in my car with the phone still pressed against my ear, listening to nothing. Through the windshield, the church looked the same as it had for my entire childhood. Same red brick, same white steeple, same stained glass window of the shepherd and his flock that Grandpa used to point to every Easter and say, "That's us, kiddo." He never loses track of his own. I used to believe that. Right now it felt like a lie somebody had painted onto glass. I thought about the fishing trips again, except this time the memory sharpened into something more painful. I was 12. My mother had just told me she and my stepfather were splitting up, and I remember sitting on the dock with Grandpa, not saying anything, just letting my feet hang over the water. "You're still my girl," he'd said, out of nowhere, like he could read exactly what I was afraid of. No piece of paper decides that. You hear me? I hadn't understood then why he needed to say it. I understood now that maybe he'd always known, on some level, that someone in this family might one day try to use paperwork against me. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text, not a call. From Derek. "Stop calling people. You're making this harder than it needs to be." I stared at the screen. My grief curdled into something colder, something with edges. Harder for who, Derek? You're the one who locked me out. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally. You'll understand later. Just let today happen the way it's supposed to happen. The way it was supposed to happen, as though there were a script and a plan, and I was an unwelcome variable that needed to be removed from the equation before the equation could resolve itself. I noticed something odd in the phrasing, the way you notice a crack in a wall you've walked past 100 times. Derek wasn't grieving in that text. Derek was managing something. Handling it. The way you'd handle a business problem, not a funeral. I put the phone down and pressed my palms against my eyes until I saw white spots. I let myself cry then, really cry, the kind of crying I hadn't allowed myself since the divorce, since my mother's funeral, since every other time I'd had to be strong for someone else instead of falling apart for myself. My shoulders shook. My breath came out in ragged little hitches. The steering wheel dug into my forearm and I didn't move it. I cried because I missed him, because I had not listened to his voicemail in time, and because somewhere inside that church, people who barely knew him were sitting in pews meant for people who loved him, and nobody had stopped to ask if that was right. And underneath all of it, quieter, harder to admit, I cried because for one terrible moment, I wondered if Derek was telling the truth. What if Grandpa really hadn't wanted me there? What if 15 years of Sunday phone calls had meant less to him than they'd meant to me? I wiped my face with the back of my hand and made myself sit up straight. No. I knew what I knew. I knew the sound of his voice when he called me his girl. I knew the way he'd shown up to my mother's funeral when half the family hadn't bothered, standing beside me in the rain without an umbrella because he said I needed one more than he did. Whatever Derek was hiding, whatever reason he had for wanting me gone today, it had nothing to do with what Grandpa actually wanted. I looked down at my phone, at the voicemail icon still waiting, unopened. Then I noticed something else. A missed call log, further down, from a number with a local area code I didn't recognize. Beneath it, a text message preview I hadn't seen come in. "This is Diane, a friend of your grandfather's. I think you need to know something before the service starts. Call me." My heart stopped. I hit call before I even finished reading the message twice. The phone rang twice before a woman's voice answered, careful and low. "Emma? Oh, thank goodness. I wasn't sure you'd call back in time. Diane, I'm sorry, who are you? How do you know my grandfather? We were neighbors for almost 20 years. I used to bring him soup when his knee acted up. He talked about you constantly, sweetheart. You should know that first." Something in my chest loosened, just slightly, hearing a stranger confirm what I already believed. "They locked me out," I said. "Derek and Carol. They wouldn't let me into the church." "I know. I saw it happen. I'm standing in the parking lot right now, and I couldn't just watch that and say nothing." She paused. "Emma, ask about the will. Ask Derek why he's in such a hurry to get this service finished." "What do you mean, in a hurry? Your grandfather told me things were changing. Legal things. He mentioned it more than once these last few months, said he'd finally set it right, whatever that meant. And then a few weeks ago, Derek started coming around a lot more than usual. Helping with paperwork, he said." My stomach dropped. "What kind of paperwork?" "I don't know exactly. But I know your grandfather seemed different after." Quieter. Like something was weighing on him. She hesitated. "I'm not trying to scare you. I just think you deserve to know before you walk back in there." I thanked her, my voice tight, and hung up before I let myself cry again. I called Mark next. My husband answered on the first ring, like he'd been staring at his phone waiting. "Emma. What's happening? Are you okay?" "They locked me out, Mark. Derek and Carol. I'm sitting in the parking lot right now." "They did what?" His voice sharpened instantly, the way it always did when someone hurt me. "That's insane. Did you call the funeral home directly? Did you talk to whoever's running the service?" "I didn't think of that." "Emma, listen to me. You have every right to be there. Don't let them make you feel like a guest in your own grandfather's life. Fight for this." I closed my eyes. I needed to hear that, needed someone outside this town, outside this family's tangled loyalties, to remind me I wasn't losing my mind. "There's more," I said. "A woman named Diane called me. She said Grandpa was changing something legal before he died. She said Derek's been hovering around the paperwork. Mark went quiet for a second. You think this is about money? I don't know what to think. But it would explain why Derek wants me gone before the service even starts. Do you have anything? Any proof of what your relationship with him was like? I thought about it, and then I remembered. My thumb found the message thread almost on instinct. Weeks of texts, voicemails I'd saved, photos from Thanksgiving. I opened my Photos app and started screenshotting, my hands steadier now that I had something to do with them. I'm sending myself copies of everything, I said. Texts, voicemails, all of it. Just in case. Good. That's good, Emma. Keep gathering. And call his lawyer. You said his name was Whitfield, right? The one who handled your grandmother's estate? I hadn't thought of that either. My mind had been so tangled in grief I hadn't considered that Grandpa might have left something behind that could actually prove the truth. I'll call him, I said. I don't know if he'll even talk to me before the service is over, but I'll try. I love you. Whatever happens today, you did nothing wrong. You hear me? I hear you. I hung up and sat for a moment, letting his words settle into the cracks Derek and Carol had left behind. Then I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I'd saved years ago, back when Grandma passed and Grandpa had insisted I keep Mr. Whitfield's information just in case anything ever happens to me too. At the time I'd thought it was morbid. Now I understood he'd been planning ahead longer than any of us realized. The call went to voicemail. I left a message, my voice cracking on every other word, asking him to call me back as soon as possible, telling him what had happened at the church. While I waited, I finally opened the voicemail from 3 weeks ago. The one I'd been too afraid to listen to. His voice filled the car, warm and a little rough the way it always was in the mornings. Hey, kiddo. Just wanted to catch you before you got busy with the kids. I made some changes I've been meaning to make. Legal things. Nothing to worry about, I just wanted you to hear it from me first before anyone else tries to tell you a different story. Call me back when you get a chance. Love you, kiddo. I played it 3 times, trying to absorb every word. Before anyone else tries to tell you a different story. He'd known. Somehow, some way, he'd known something like this might happen. I pressed my hand against my mouth and let out a breath that shook the whole way through my body. The loss of him hit me freshly, differently now, because it wasn't just grief anymore. It was the ache of realizing he'd been trying to protect me and I hadn't answered in time. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel this time, different from before, hesitant. Emma. Ask him about the will. Just ask him. I think something's wrong and I don't know what to do. I stared at the screen, my pulse hammering. Whatever Derek was hiding, it was starting to crack open from more than one direction, and I intended to be standing at those church doors again before it did. I drove to the diner 2 blocks from the church, the same one Grandpa used to take me for pancakes after Sunday service when I was a kid. I needed somewhere quiet, somewhere that wasn't the parking lot where I could still hear the faint sound of the organ through the walls of the sanctuary. I sat in a booth by the window and pulled out my phone, my coffee untouched in front of me, going cold. Mr. Whitfield called back within 10 minutes. Emma. I got your message. Tell me exactly what happened. I told him everything. The locked door. Derek's excuses. Carol's fake sympathy. Diane's warning about paperwork. My hands wrapped around the coffee cup like it was the only warm thing left in the world. Mr. Whitfield, I need you to tell me what's in that will. He was quiet for a moment, and I could hear him shuffling something on his end, papers maybe, or his own thoughts. Emma, I can't discuss the details over the phone without proper verification, you understand that. But I can tell you this much. Your grandfather came into my office 6 weeks ago and made significant revisions to his estate plan. He was very specific about what he wanted, and very specific about who he didn't want interfering with it. My breath caught. Interfering. Meaning Derek? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. He sighed, and I heard something almost like sympathy in it. Get yourself back to that funeral, Emma. I'm going to make some calls of my own. I hung up and sat there for a second, staring at the steam that wasn't rising from my coffee anymore because it had gone completely cold. My phone buzzed again. A group text notification, one I wasn't part of, but that had somehow been forwarded to me by a screenshot from an unknown number. I opened it, my stomach twisting before I even read the words. It was a photo of a message thread. Derek, writing to someone named Todd, someone I didn't recognize. We need to get this handled before Emma finds out. Once the service is done and everyone signs off, it won't matter what she says. I read it 3 times, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Sign off on what? What was there to sign off on at a funeral? Underneath the screenshot, a message from the unknown number, "This is Rachel. I took this off his phone last night." I didn't understand it then. I think I do now. I'm sorry, Emma. I should have said something sooner. I called her immediately. Rachel, what is this? What is Derek trying to get people to sign? Her voice came out shaky, barely above a whisper. There's a document. Todd's a notary, Emma, he's not even really a friend, Derek just knows him from work. I think Derek's trying to get some kind of paper signed today, while everyone's together, while everyone's distracted by grief. I don't know exactly what it is, but I know it has something to do with the house. The property. The property meant Grandpa's house, the one with the dock out back where he'd taught me to fish, the one that had been in the family for 3 generations. I never should have gone along with it, Emma, Rachel continued, her voice cracking. When Derek said you weren't allowed in, I just went along with it because that's what we do, we don't push back, we don't cause problems. But this isn't right. None of this is right. Rachel, I need you to do something for me. Can you find out what time the service is supposed to end? I need to know how much time I have. 15 minutes, she said. Maybe less. Derek asked Father Collins to shorten the eulogy portion. He said it was because Grandpa wouldn't have wanted anything long and drawn out, but Emma, that's not true. Grandpa loved long services. He loved when people took their time to say what mattered. Fear closed around my throat like a hand. 15 minutes. Whatever was happening in that church, whatever Derek was trying to finish before I could stop it, I was running out of time to intervene. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for telling me. What are you going to do? I looked out the diner window, toward the steeple visible over the rooftops 2 blocks away. I'm going back. And this time I'm not leaving. I gathered my things, my hands finally steady now that grief had become purpose. I pulled up the screenshots on my phone, one folder for the texts, one for the voicemail, everything organized the way Mark had told me to organize it. I thought about calling him again, but there wasn't time. There wasn't time for anything except getting back to that church before the doors closed on something far more permanent than a funeral service. As I stood to leave, my phone rang one more time. Mr. Whitfield again. Emma, I need you to listen carefully. I made a call to the courthouse clerk, someone I know well. There's no filing yet on any new property transfer, which means whatever Derek is trying to do today, it hasn't gone through the proper channels. If he's asking people to sign something at the funeral, it likely isn't legally binding without additional steps, but Emma, I strongly suggest you get back there and stop this before it goes any further. Sometimes these things get messy even when they shouldn't hold up in court. I'm on my way right now. Good. And Emma? Your grandfather trusted you. Whatever happens today, don't forget that. I hung up, threw a $5 bill on the table for the coffee I never drank, and walked out into the afternoon light. The church was 2 blocks away. I could make it in under 5 minutes if I hurried. I started walking, then broke into a run, my heels slapping against the pavement, my heart pounding harder with every step, because somewhere behind those doors, a man I loved more than almost anyone in the world was being buried by people trying to steal from him before he was even in the ground. I reached the church steps out of breath, my chest heaving, my heels scraping against pavement I barely felt. Derek was still there, standing guard like nothing had changed, except now his eyes widened when he saw me coming. "Emma, I told you. I'm not asking permission this time, Derek." I walked straight for the door. He stepped in front of me, blocking it with his whole body, his voice rising loud enough that people near the entrance turned to look. "You need to leave. Now. This isn't your place." "My place." I laughed, though nothing about this felt funny. "You mean the place where I sat every Thanksgiving for 30 years? Where I learned to fish off his dock when I was 9? That place? You're causing a scene. You caused the scene when you locked me out of my grandfather's funeral, Derek." Behind him, I saw Rachel appear in the doorway, her face pale, her hands twisting together. She didn't retreat this time. She stepped forward instead, standing slightly to my side, a small but unmistakable shift. "Let her in," Rachel said, her voice shaking but clear. "Derek, let her in." "Rachel, stay out of this." "No." Diane's voice came from behind me now, firm and unwavering, the woman I'd only spoken to on the phone an hour earlier now standing solid at my shoulder. "She has every right to be here, and you know it." Derek's face flushed red, panic flickering underneath the anger. "This doesn't concern either of you." "It concerns all of us," Diane said. "Your grandfather was my neighbor for 20 years. I watched him talk about this woman like she hung the moon. Don't you dare stand there and tell me she doesn't belong." The funeral director appeared in the doorway now too, caught between Derek's earlier instructions and the growing commotion outside, his expression torn, uncertain who to listen to. "Sir, perhaps we should." "She's not on the list," Derek snapped, though his voice cracked slightly on the word list, like even he didn't quite believe it anymore. "There is no list," I said. "There never was. There's just you, trying to keep me out before I can find out what you're really doing in there." His jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" I pulled out my phone, holding it up but not pressing play, not yet. "I have a voicemail from Grandpa, 3 weeks old, where he says he made legal changes and wanted me to hear it from him first, before anyone tried to tell me a different story. I have a screenshot of your text to Todd, saying you needed to get things handled before I found out." "Handled, Derek?" "Before a funeral was even over." The color drained from his face so fast I almost felt sorry for him. "Almost." "That's out of context," he said, though his voice had lost all its earlier certainty. "Then give me the context. Tell me what you're trying to get people to sign in there while everyone's too busy grieving to notice." He didn't answer. The silence stretched long enough that Rachel exhaled audibly beside me, like she'd been holding her breath for this exact moment. "You don't want me to say what I know out here, do you?" I said, quieter now, watching the panic bloom fully behind his eyes. "In front of everyone. Before the service even ends. Emma, please." His voice dropped too, pleading now instead of commanding. "Just wait until after. We can talk about this privately." "We're done talking privately, Derek. You made sure of that when you had me thrown out of my own grandfather's funeral." The funeral director shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us, then toward the sanctuary doors where the organ music had begun to fade, signaling the service was moving toward its closing moments. "I have to make a decision here," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I can't have this dispute happening on the church steps." "Then let her in," Diane said again, sharper this time. "Let the priest decide. Let Father Collins hear what's happening and decide for himself who belongs in that room." Derek opened his mouth to argue, but something in his face had already started to collapse, the fight draining out of him as more people gathered near the entrance, drawn by the sound of raised voices, drawn by the sight of a woman standing her ground against a man who'd tried to erase her. I could hear whispers starting among the small crowd. I caught fragments, questions about why Emma wasn't allowed inside, why Derek was blocking the door, why this was happening at all. Somewhere in that murmuring crowd, I thought I heard someone mention money, the house, an inheritance, and I realized the secret Derek had been trying so hard to protect was already beginning to slip loose on its own, whispered from person to person faster than he could contain it. The funeral director looked at Derek one final time, waiting for permission that clearly wasn't coming, and then he looked at me instead. "Come with me," he said quietly. "Let's go inside." Derek's hand shot out, gripping my arm. "Emma, wait." I looked down at his hand, then back up at his face, steadier now than I'd felt all day. "You had your chance to do this the right way," I said. "Now it's Grandpa's turn." I pulled my arm free and walked past him, through the doors he'd tried so hard to keep closed, Rachel and Diane close behind me, the murmuring crowd parting slightly to let us through, and somewhere ahead of me, past the pews, past the flowers, I could see the casket waiting, and beside it, Father Collins, who had just turned toward the commotion at the door with an expression that told me he already knew something was very wrong. The doors opened, and every head in that sanctuary turned at once. The silence was immediate and heavy, that presses against your chest. Father Collins stopped mid-sentence, his hand still raised above the pulpit, his eyes finding mine across the length of the church. I walked down the center aisle. My heels echoed against the old wood floor, each step sounding louder than it had any right to be. Carol half rose from her pew, her face flushing red, but she didn't say anything. Nobody said anything. Father Collins lowered his hand slowly. "Emma," he said, his voice carrying easily through the quiet sanctuary. "I was wondering when you'd arrive." The words landed strangely, like he'd been expecting me all along. "Father, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need." "No," he said gently. "I think it's time I said something, and I think it's time everyone here heard it." He set down his notes and stepped around the pulpit, closer to the casket, closer to me. "3 weeks ago, your grandfather came to see me. Not for confession, not for anything routine. He sat right where you're standing now and he told me he was worried." My throat tightened. I felt Rachel's hand find mine from behind, steadying me. "He said, Father, if something happens to me, and my granddaughter Emma isn't here, something is wrong. Make sure she's here. Make sure she's seated up front, where she belongs." A murmur rippled through the pews. I saw Carol's hand fly to her mouth. I saw Derek standing frozen in the doorway behind me, his face draining of every ounce of color it had left. "He told me he'd made changes to his will," Father Collins continued. "He said he suspected someone in this family might try to take advantage once he was gone, and he wanted to make sure the truth came out, no matter what happened. He left a letter with me, to be read if Emma was ever kept from this service." He reached into his robe and pulled out a folded envelope, worn soft at the edges like it had been handled many times. I didn't think I'd actually need to read it. I hoped I was wrong. But when the doors opened 15 minutes late and I saw the look on people's faces outside, I understood exactly what your grandfather had feared. He unfolded the letter, and the church went utterly still. "To whoever is reading this, if my Emma isn't standing beside me today, then someone has done exactly what I was afraid of. She has been my girl since she was 6 years old, blood or no blood, and I will not have her erased from my life the way some people in this family have tried to erase her all along. My house, my savings, and everything I own beyond small gifts to my other grandchildren, I leave to Emma, because she is the only one who never once asked me for anything." Gasps rippled through the pews. Carol was crying now, silently, her shoulders shaking. Derek made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob, disbelieving, cornered. "This is insane," he said, his voice cracking. "He wouldn't do that. He wouldn't cut out his own grandchildren for her." "He already did," said a new voice, and I turned to see Mr. Whitfield himself walking down the side aisle, phone still in his hand. "I filed the amended will 6 weeks ago. It's already on record at the courthouse. I confirmed it myself an hour ago when Emma called me in a panic, and I drove straight here because I suspected something like this might happen." The room seemed to exhale as years of family assumptions collapsed. "You knew," Derek said, staring at Whitfield, his voice hollow now instead of angry. "You knew this whole time and you let me." I let you make your own choices, Whitfield said evenly. Just as your grandfather made his. Derek's legs seemed to give slightly, and he caught himself against the back pew, his composure completely gone, replaced by something raw and exposed. The anger that had fueled him all morning had nowhere left to go, and it collapsed into something smaller, uglier, panic dressed up as grief. This is settled, Father Collins said quietly, looking at me now, his eyes kind. It's over, Emma. Come sit with your family. Carol wouldn't meet my eyes. Derek stood frozen, silent, the fight completely drained out of him. But Rachel squeezed my hand once more and walked beside me as Father Collins guided me toward the front pew, toward the casket, toward the place I should have been standing since the doors first opened that morning. I looked down at my grandfather's face, peaceful, familiar, and for the first time since I'd arrived in this town, I let myself simply grieve without having to fight for the right to do it. He knew you'd try this, Father Collins said quietly to Derek, not unkindly, but firmly. That's why he wrote it down. That's why he came to me instead of just leaving it in a drawer somewhere for you to find first. Derek didn't answer. He simply turned and walked out of the sanctuary, his footsteps the only sound in the otherwise silent church, the doors closing behind him with a soft, final click. I sat beside the casket for the rest of the service, my hand resting on the polished wood, listening to Father Collins finish the eulogy he'd started an hour earlier, this time with me exactly where Grandpa had wanted me all along. When it ended, people filed past slowly, some pausing to squeeze my shoulder, others avoiding my eyes entirely, uncertain how to look at the woman who had just appended everything they thought they understood about this family. Rachel found me near the back afterward, her eyes red, her hands twisting together the way they had in the parking lot that morning. I'm sorry, Emma. I should have trusted what I already knew. I knew you loved him. I just let everyone else's version drown that out. You told me the truth when it mattered, I said. That's what counts. Carol approached hesitantly, her makeup smudged from crying, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. I didn't know about the letter, she said. I swear I didn't know. But you knew about locking me out, I said gently, not unkindly, just honestly. That part, you knew. She didn't have an answer for that, and I didn't need one. Some truths require no response, only acknowledgement, and the silence between us said enough. Derek didn't come to the reception. Rachel told me later that he'd driven off before the final hymn even finished, and that nobody had heard from him since. I didn't feel triumphant about that. Mostly I just felt tired, the way you feel after carrying something heavy for a very long distance. Diane found me by the dessert table, her hand warm on my arm. Your grandfather talked about you more than anyone else, you know. Every time I brought him soup, it was Emma this, Emma that. He was so proud of you. I hugged her, this stranger who had become the reason I made it back through those doors in time, and thanked her for something I could never fully repay. That evening, driving home, I thought about everything that had happened. I thought about how easily people had accepted Derek's version of events, simply because it was convenient, simply because nobody wanted to make a scene. I thought about how close I'd come to losing not just my seat at that funeral, but the truth of who I'd been to my grandfather for 15 years. I didn't need the will to know I belonged there. But I'm glad the truth came out anyway, because some truths deserve to be spoken out loud, in front of everyone, instead of buried quietly along with the people who knew them. If you've ever been shut out by the very people who should have protected you, I want you to know something. The truth has a way of finding its own way to the surface, even when people try their hardest to keep the doors closed. If this story meant something to you, share your own experience in the comments. Someone reading may need to know they are not alone. This has been Family Betrayal Verdict. Thank you for staying with me until the end.